This is the story of courage that defied empires, of ordinary men and women who dared to dream of freedom. It is a story of tension, of rebellion simmering beneath the surface, and of a continent waiting to be transformed. The outcome was uncertain. Would these 13 colonies withstand the might of the British Empire? Or would their ambition crumble beneath its weight? Who would rise as leaders? Who would fall in silence? And what legacy would remain for generations to come? The seeds of revolution were planted long before the first shots were fired. Across the Atlantic, British subjects in America were thriving economically, yet chafing under a growing sense of injustice. They were farmers, artisans, merchants, and thinkers, bound by the English language and laws, yet separated by oceans from the decision-makers who ruled their lives. Every tax imposed, every act of parliamentary control, stirred the embers of resentment that would ignite a continent. By the mid-18th century, tensions had escalated into open protest. The famous cry of "no taxation without representation" echoed through the streets of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Citizens refused to pay taxes on tea, on stamps, on goods imported from across the empire. They formed committees, held town meetings, and debated fiercely about their rights as Englishmen. Yet they were beginning to see themselves as more than subjects. They were beginning to see themselves as Americans. The British Crown, distant and unyielding, saw these acts as defiance, a threat to the order of the empire. Soldiers were sent to enforce laws. Ships blockaded ports. Protests escalated into violent clashes. Every skirmish, every Boston massacre, every frustrated debate in the halls of government deepened the divide. Fear and hope wrestled in the hearts of colonists. Fear of retaliation, hope for liberty. Amid these tensions, extraordinary individuals emerged. Men like Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, and John Adams spoke boldly, their words igniting passion and shaping ideas that would define a nation. Women and ordinary families supported the cause quietly, yet powerfully, boycotting imported goods, organizing aid, and keeping communities resilient. Every choice mattered, every sacrifice counted. The stage was set for a revolution that would challenge history itself. From the cobblestone streets of Boston to the rolling hills of Virginia, whispers of rebellion turned into meetings, meetings into declarations, and declarations into the unthinkable: independence. The idea that 13 colonies could defy the most powerful empire in the world was once unthinkable, yet it was no longer just a dream. It was a vision, daring, dangerous, and unstoppable. The roots of revolution stretched deep into the soil of colonial life, where British policies and colonial ambition collided. In the aftermath of the French and Indian War, Britain emerged victorious but financially strained. To replenish the treasury, Parliament turned to its American colonies, imposing taxes on goods, on paper, on tea. These measures, distant in London but immediate in Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston, sparked outrage. The colonists argued, why should they pay for a war fought thousands of miles away, a war they had fought in part to defend their own homes? The Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 marked a turning point. These were not mere fiscal policies. They were symbols of control, reminders that the colonies remained under distant authority. Riots erupted in port cities. Sons of Liberty, a secretive but powerful group, organized protests, intimidated tax collectors, and united communities around the notion of liberty. Across taverns, town halls, and workshops, debates ignited about natural rights, justice, and the role of government. Ordinary conversations became revolutionary discourse. The Boston Massacre of 1770 etched fear and anger into the hearts of the colonists. British soldiers, stationed to maintain order, fired into a crowd of protesters, killing 5 men. The event became a rallying point, propaganda that transcended fact and fiction, showing the world the consequences of oppression. Crisp images, broadsheets, and oral storytelling spread the tale, fueling the desire for self-determination. Every family, Every tradesman, every schoolchild heard the story and felt the tension between liberty and subjugation. As the 1770s unfolded, tensions escalated further. The Tea Act of 1773 led to the iconic Boston Tea Party, where colonists, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded ships and dumped chests of tea into the harbor. It was both an act of defiance and a message. The colonies would not be subjugated quietly. The British responded with the coercive acts, the so-called Intolerable Acts, punishing Massachusetts and tightening control over colonial governance. In every colony, leaders met to discuss collective resistance, setting the stage for unity against a common adversary. Intellectual currents also shaped the revolution. Thinkers like John Locke, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau inspired the colonists' ideas of natural rights, consent of the governed, and social contract. Pamphlets, newspapers, and public speeches spread these ideas widely. The ordinary citizen began to imagine a society where power derived from the people, not from a distant monarch. Political thought became action, and action became the heartbeat of revolution. By 1774, the First Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. Delegates from 12 colonies gathered, their faces a mixture of fear, determination, and ambition. They petitioned the crown for redress, yet their unity carried the unspoken truth. They were preparing, consciously or not, for the possibility of independence. Committees of correspondence connected colonies, sharing intelligence, planning boycotts, and fostering a sense of collective identity. A new American consciousness was taking shape. The stage was set. A generation that had grown up under British rule was now ready to question the very legitimacy of that rule. The fires of rebellion were no longer sparks. They had become a blaze, visible across the colonies, impossible to ignore. Every town meeting, every pamphlet, every whispered conversation contributed to a momentum that could not be turned back. A continent teetered on the brink of history. And then, on April 19th, 1775, history was irreversibly altered. In the towns of Lexington and Concord, British troops marched to seize colonial arms, only to encounter armed resistance. Shots rang out, the shot heard round the world, and the American Revolution had begun. Ordinary men, farmers, and tradesmen became soldiers overnight. The dream of liberty transformed into a fight for survival, for identity, for the future itself. The battles of Lexington and Concord awakened a spark that had long been simmering. In the aftermath, colonial militias swelled as farmers, artisans, and tradesmen took up arms. They were not professional soldiers, yet their determination was fierce, their cause just. Amid the chaos, George Washington emerged as a figure of unity. Appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army in 1775, Washington carried the heavy burden of transforming ragged militias into an organized force capable of challenging the British Empire. The siege of Boston began in earnest. Colonial forces surrounded the city, cutting off British reinforcements and supplies. Skirmishes erupted on the outskirts, most notably the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. Though the British technically won the battle, the cost was staggering. Hundreds of soldiers dead or wounded. For the colonists, it was a moral victory. Ordinary men had stood against the mightiest army in the world and inflicted serious damage. Confidence grew. Courage was contagious. Meanwhile, political leaders were pushing toward a more radical step. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and others debated the merits of independence, weighing loyalty to the crown against the call of liberty. In June 1776, the Continental Congress formed a committee to draft a document that would articulate the colonies' intentions and unite them in common cause. The task was monumental to justify rebellion not only in practical terms, but in moral and philosophical ones as well. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Jefferson's words proclaimed that All men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was more than a political statement. It was a moral challenge to an empire. The colonies were no longer subjects. They were now citizens of a new nation, willing to risk everything for freedom. Across the colonies, news of the Declaration spread like wildfire, inspiring celebrations, debates, and renewed commitment to the cause. Yet, words alone could not win a war. Early battles tested the mettle of the Continental Army. At Long Island, New York, in August 1776, Washington's forces suffered a severe defeat. Retreats followed, morale faltered, and doubts crept in. But Washington's leadership, his steadfast commitment to the cause, held the army together. He understood that survival, even in defeat, was as crucial as victory. Strategy, patience, and adaptability became his tools against a better-equipped enemy. Winter, however, offered a reprieve. In December 1776, facing dwindling supplies and soldiers' desertions, Washington led a daring crossing of the icy Delaware River. The surprise attack on Hessian forces in Trenton reinvigorated the revolution. Men who had faced despair now felt hope. The momentum shifted. Ordinary citizens began to believe that independence was achievable, not just aspirational. Courage and audacity became hallmarks of the struggle. Across the colonies, victories and setbacks intertwined. The Battle of Princeton, skirmishes in New Jersey, and campaigns in New York showcased the resilience of a nascent army and the tenacity of a people determined to shape their destiny. Civilians provided shelter, supplies, and intelligence. Women took on new roles, managing farms, businesses, and communication networks. Revolution was no longer the work of a few leaders. It had become a collective endeavor, a societal transformation fueled by shared conviction. By the end of 1776, the colonies had crossed an ideological Rubicon. The leap from protest to rebellion had been made. Independence was no longer a distant concept. It was a tangible goal, supported by victories on the battlefield, commitment in Congress, and the unwavering belief of ordinary people. The stage was set for the next phase: full-scale war, alliances with foreign powers, and the challenge of turning a fledgling nation into a legitimate state. 1777 marked a critical juncture in the Revolutionary War. The British, confident in their military superiority, aimed to split the colonies along the Hudson River, isolating New England from the southern colonies. The Battle of Saratoga became the defining moment. American forces, led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, executed a strategic victory that stunned the British. It was not just a military triumph. It was a proof that the colonies could defeat the empire in conventional battle. The victory at Saratoga had far-reaching consequences. Most importantly, it convinced France that the American cause was viable. In 1778, France formally allied with the colonies, providing troops, naval support, and essential supplies. Spain and the Dutch Republic would follow, recognizing that the struggle for American independence was not merely a local rebellion, but a geopolitical challenge to European powers. The war transformed from a colonial insurrection into a global conflict. Throughout this period, George Washington's leadership remained the linchpin of the revolutionary effort. At Valley Forge in the winter of 1777 to 1778, the Continental Army endured bitter cold, hunger, and disease. Yet, under the guidance of officers like Baron von Steuben, the soldiers emerged stronger, disciplined, and better prepared. The hardships forged resilience, transforming ragtag militias into a formidable army capable of standing toe-to-toe with British regulars. In the southern colonies, a different kind of warfare unfolded. Loyalist and patriot forces clashed in brutal skirmishes across the Carolinas and Georgia. The war was personal, often pitting neighbor against neighbor. Figures like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, used guerrilla tactics to harass British troops, keeping the struggle alive even when conventional battles went poorly. Civilians endured hardship, yet their support for independence was unwavering. Foreign alliances were decisive. French naval power under Admiral de Grasse, combined with Lafayette's leadership on land, created opportunities that would have been impossible for the colonies alone. In 1781, the Siege of Yorktown became the culminating moment of the Revolution. British General Cornwallis found himself trapped between Washington's army and the French fleet. After weeks of siege and dwindling supplies, Cornwallis surrendered. The dream of independence, once fragile, now became reality. Victory at Yorktown did not immediately end the war. Diplomatic negotiations, led by Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams, continued for 2 more years. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, formally recognized the United States as an independent nation. Boundaries were drawn, rights were recognized, and the once fractured colonies were now united as a sovereign entity on the world stage. The world had witnessed the birth of a nation, and the course of history had changed forever. The revolution was not simply a military struggle. It was a transformation of society, politics, and identity. Leaders emerged who embodied courage and vision, but ordinary men and women shaped the outcome through resilience and sacrifice. Communities adapted, economies shifted, and a new political consciousness took root. The principles of liberty, equality, and governance by consent became not just slogans, but guiding truths for a fledgling nation. By 1781, the impossible had been achieved. 13 colonies had confronted the might of the British Empire and emerged victorious. The American Revolution demonstrated the power of unity, the strength of conviction, and the potential for ordinary people to alter the course of history. From the first skirmishes in New England to the triumph at Yorktown, the narrative of courage, sacrifice, and vision had been written in blood, ink, and unwavering resolve. Victory on the battlefield did not automatically translate into a functioning government. The war had forged a new nation, but one without clear rules for governance. The Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781, provided a framework for unity, but it was a fragile one. The federal government lacked the power to tax, regulate commerce, or enforce laws. States acted with considerable independence, often at odds with one another. The revolution had won freedom, but the question remained: how would the new nation survive and thrive? Challenges soon manifested. Economic turmoil, debt from the war, and interstate disputes threatened the stability of the new nation. Shays' Rebellion in 1786 to 1787, led by Massachusetts farmers protesting high taxes and foreclosures, revealed the weaknesses of the Articles. The rebellion underscored a vital truth: liberty without order could collapse into chaos. The new leaders realized that the ideals of the revolution required not just courage, but a strong, functioning government to sustain them. In 1787, delegates from 12 states convened in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. What emerged, however, was far more ambitious: the United States Constitution. Crafted by leaders such as James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington, the document balanced the need for a strong federal government with the principles of liberty and popular sovereignty. It established a system of checks and balances, separation of powers, and a framework for a republic governed by consent. Debates were intense. Federalists argued for a strong central government capable of unifying and guiding the nation. Anti-Federalists feared tyranny and the erosion of individual liberties. Compromise was essential. The Bill of Rights, ratified in 1791, addressed these concerns, guaranteeing fundamental freedoms such as speech, assembly, religion, and the right to a fair trial. The Constitution was no longer just a legal document. It was a living testament to the ideals of the Revolution, a guide for generations to come. The new nation faced immediate challenges. Diplomacy, economic recovery, and westward expansion demanded careful navigation. Leaders like Washington, Jefferson, and Madison understood that survival depended on balancing ambition with prudence, ideals with pragmatism. The young republic needed not just brave soldiers, but wise statesmen, engaged citizens, and institutions capable of adapting to change. The revolution had ended on the battlefield, but the work of nation-building was just beginning. Beyond governance, the revolution left a profound social and cultural legacy. It reshaped ideas about citizenship, equality, and human rights. People across the nation began to imagine a society where merit, rather than birth, determined opportunity, where citizens could participate in governance, where ideals of liberty were not theoretical, but actionable. Education, civic participation, and public debate flourished, embedding the revolutionary spirit into the very fabric of American life. The revolution also set a precedent for the world. It demonstrated that determined people could challenge empires, that ideals could outweigh tyranny, and that the course of history could be altered by collective will. From Europe to Latin America, nations watched and learned, inspired by the boldness and vision of a people who refused to accept subjugation. The birth of the United States became not only a historical event, but a symbol of human aspiration. By 1789, the Constitution had been ratified, George Washington inaugurated as the first president, and the United States of America stood as a unified, sovereign nation. The revolution had begun as a struggle for survival, evolved into a war for independence, and concluded with the creation of a political system designed to preserve liberty. The story of the birth of the United States is, above all, a story of courage, vision, and enduring hope. The legacy of the revolution endures. It is etched in the Constitution, in the freedoms enjoyed by citizens, and in the ongoing pursuit of equality and justice. Every generation inherits the responsibility to safeguard the ideals won through struggle and sacrifice. The birth of the United States reminds the world that freedom is not a gift, but a pursuit, that history is shaped by those willing to act, and that courage, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can alter the destiny of nations. The story of the birth of the United States is, above all, a story of human courage. Ordinary men and women, farmers and tradespeople, mothers and sons, risked everything for a vision of liberty. They faced the mightiest empire of their time, often with little more than determination, hope, and conviction. Each decision, each battle, each act of defiance carried weight beyond the moment, shaping not only the outcome of war, but the moral and political foundation of a nation yet to be fully realized. The revolution was as much about ideas as it was about battles. Concepts of equality, natural rights, and government by consent were no longer abstract notions. They were living principles, tested in the fires of conflict. Leaders like Jefferson, Washington, and Franklin articulated a vision, but it was the collective will of countless unnamed individuals that gave the revolution its enduring power. Every soldier who marched through snow, every mother who sheltered rebels, every citizen who dared to speak against authority contributed to a legacy that would echo for centuries. The consequences of their struggle reached far beyond the 13 colonies. The American Revolution became a beacon for oppressed peoples around the world. It showed that empires could be challenged, that governments could be held accountable, and that ordinary citizens could shape the destiny of nations. From France to Latin America, from Europe to Asia, the ideas of self-determination and liberty inspired generations to envision a world where human rights were more than words. They were actionable, achievable ideals. Yet, the revolution was not perfect. Slavery remained. Women were not yet full citizens, and the struggle for equality would continue for centuries. The birth of a nation is never without contradiction. But within these imperfections lies the power of the revolution. It sparked dialogue, inspired reform, and established principles that could be expanded, refined, and made more inclusive over time. The courage of those first patriots set a standard for future generations, a reminder that liberty is a continual endeavor, not a completed project. The human stories of the Revolution remind us that history is made by individuals, yet shaped collectively. Courage is contagious. Conviction can ripple across generations. When farmers, merchants, and intellectuals dared to defy the most powerful empire of their era, they demonstrated the profound truth that liberty demands action, not passivity. Every choice carried consequences. Every sacrifice built the framework for a society that would one day become a global exemplar of democratic governance. As we reflect on the birth of the United States, it becomes clear that the Revolution was not simply about territory or political control. It was a struggle for identity, for the recognition of human dignity, for the possibility that people could govern themselves justly. The men and women who fought, debated, and envisioned a new nation left a legacy that transcends time. Their story challenges us to consider our own responsibilities, to cherish freedom, and to act when principles are at stake. The birth of the United States is a story of vision and perseverance. It is a testament to the idea that ordinary people, united by shared ideals, can alter the course of history. From the first acts of defiance to the establishment of a democratic government, the Revolution demonstrates that liberty is never guaranteed, but must be fought for, defended, and renewed by each generation. The echoes of 1776 remain alive today, reminding the world that courage, conviction, and hope are timeless forces capable of shaping nations. And so, the story of the United States' birth is more than a chronicle of events. It is a reflection on human determination, a celebration of ideals, and an enduring lesson in the power of collective action. From the smoke of battlefields to the halls of Congress, from whispered conversations in colonial taverns to the grand Declaration of Independence, the Revolution reminds us that history is made by those who dare to dream, to act, and to believe that a better world is possible.